Hello everyone, my name is Christopher Wheatley. I'm a senior materials engineer here at the University of Kentucky, and as a materials engineer, I'm fascinated with finding out how all these various materials work and shape our modern world. Today, I want to go behind the story of fiber optics and the work of one female Dutch scientist to change the world and how we view the internet today. But first, let me take you somewhere. Well, I'm currently in the basement of the Rose Street parking garage. I've walked past here I don't know how many times during my 5 years here on campus, but I've never been inside the blue door that's kind of in the center. But we're gonna go check out something really cool. I am here in one of the fiber optic cabinets here at the University of Kentucky. The IT department maintains hundreds of these kind of cabinets all throughout both campus as well as with the UK healthcare system. These serve as the main line for all of UK's internet and communications. Everything from class schedules to supercomputer runs on information and systems very similar to this. This is actually one of the older systems in use, and when I show you the newer systems, you'll find that it is too loud for me to actually do a recording there. So I still wanted to show you all just the extensive fiber optics that we rely on for our daily communication. And so, for the most part, we're used to our wireless communication, right? But there's no way that wireless communication can match the sheer speed that these fiber optic systems can handle. They are just so incredibly fast. And so, like one more time, this was the old 900 pair copper system.
I don't know what it is.
Or the old copper system for the telephone.
Let's call it a. I don't see any markings on it, unfortunately. But
versus the new fiber optic.
This is 144 strands of fiber, and let's say that's. Let's say it's a 600 pair.
Way
so
more.
1200.
Oh my goodness. Versus this, I could almost pick it up with one.
Yeah.
That's crazy. And this is way more.
And each strand of this, you can put, 100 gigs on it. It's really the limits. There's really no limit. We haven't figured out what the limit is on the bandwidth. It's just how fast you can blink the light at each end.
And this complicated fiber optic world that I want to show you is what connects the world together. In fact, this is an example of what is known as the backbone of the internet, where companies all throughout the world have connected the world together using fiber optics. It's used in the New York Stock Exchange to gain nanoseconds ahead of the market, and you can find it being in your home with your audio equipment. The idea of using light to transmit information is not a new one, but I think it's something that most of us are unfamiliar with. So I'd love to delve into how these devices work. Now, when most of us think of cables carrying signals, we think of the power cables that we use to charge our cell phones. This is very useful in carrying electrical current and electrons. However, there are other ways of carrying a signal. Going back to your childhood, you can imagine the 2 tin cans on a string, where you could whisper something to your friend 10 feet away and they could hear everything as long as they held the can up to their ear. In the same way, these cables carry electrons. Now you can see here in this cell phone charging cable, there's this rubber bit that kind of insulates everything. Inside that is actually a steel wire for additional strength. And then as you get deeper and deeper into, you can see the actual copper wires that are used to carry the current. They're incredibly small relative to the rest of the piece. You actually see that they're actually insulated with some more plastic before you can get to the copper. Now, fiber optic cables have multiple advantages over their electrical counterparts. For audiophiles who are interested in the highest fidelity of sound possible, the copper wires for carrying sound can also carry interference electromagnetically. And so, for instance, with this fiber optic cable, it is used to plug up stereos to TVs and etc. And since the light carries no electromagnetic interference, That's one less thing they have to worry about with their incredibly sensitive electronic equipment. Now, there are several advantages that fiber optic carries over electrical depending on what you want to use it for. For audiophiles who are interested in the highest sound fidelity possible, these fiber optic cables carry photons, not electrons. And so in their incredibly sensitive electrical systems, there can be no electromagnetic interference, at least when they use these wires. And so that eliminates one less thing they have to worry about and all of the possible interference in their electrical system. And that is why oftentimes you'll see these fiber optic cables being able to plug into your video game console to your TV, or your TV to your stereo system. Okay, so how fiber optic cables work is you have an outer shell, and this is typically made of a plastic of some kind, and it only serves to protect the inner glass pieces. Now, there are actually two glass pieces inside. There's the outer cladding and the inner core. And so this cladding on the outside is what the light travels through, and this core in the center helps to keep everything, the light centered. How this works is that if you have a cable that has this cladding and inner core, and as you have light travel through, light will, if it bounces at just the right angle, it will actually bounce all the way across and not actually go out the sides. So as long as you keep the right angle, we don't see any of this, and it goes. There are a couple other advantages as well. For instance, with fiber optic cables, if you keep that angle, all the light remains inside the cable, and you can have a much longer wire and still maintain the same strength of signal, so you can go further and further distances versus a similar copper counterpoint. But one of the biggest advantages we found is the amount of bandwidth, or amount of data that you're able to shove through the pipe at one time. You can actually think of this in terms of cars versus airplanes. Cars on the road are restricted to how big the road is. The amount of lanes is the max amount of cars, and if you get too many cars on the road, it all gets clogged, and that's when you start to have problems. With cars, in the case of traffic jams, but if you start having too much current, too many electrons in your copper wire, then you have the danger of fire or other disasters. The fiber optic cables can be thought of more like aeroplanes, where instead of just limited to how many lanes you have the entire altitude from ground level all the way out to space. And so two airplanes can intersect each other, but as long as they're at different heights, then they won't crash. And so you can see how in fiber optic cables, since they have a much higher bandwidth. Here, using my cinematography software, we have something called a vector scope. And what this does is look at the colors in the image and output how intense each color is. In this particular video, we have some yellows and we have some blues. And so here on the vector scope, you can see the yellows and blues as really high peaks. This is why fiber optic is so cool, because since the fiber optic acts like an airplane, you have multiple different, in the same way of having multiple airplanes, you have lots of different light wavelengths. But since they are of different wavelength, they don't really interact with each other. They don't mix. And so you can have one data being with all the yellow lights and one data being with all of the blue lights, and they won't intersect, which allows you to carry double or triple, or how many colors that you have, the bandwidth. Earlier, you remember I talked about a Dutch scientist that kind of paved the way for fiber optics. And this is Dr. Joka Vandenberg. Dr. Vandenberg graduated from university with chemistry in 1964, and in 1968 she immigrated to the United States to work on projects at the famous Bell Labs think tank and laboratory here in New Jersey. And it was here that she would start to work on the projects that would have the greatest impact, her work on fiber optics, and specifically the contacts that we use to make these signals. If we go back to the metaphor of the can, it's really nice to carry a string and have that signal go across, but if you can't translate that to something useful, then what's the point? In the same way, fiber optics are crazy good at transmitting light, but it's much simpler to have an electrical system built in. So how do we have that light translate to electrical signals when they end up wherever they need to be? And so Dr. Joka's research focused on how this light would be turned into an electrical signal that computers and machines could read. Dr. Vandenberg's research worked directly kind of relating this electrical signal. And so her work focused on gold films, in that as the light leaves the optical cable, it hits a gold film, and how that light reflects and refracts is how the machine would figure out what the light was trying to tell them. And so in the same way, as you can see, when I have a flashlight kind of shining into the other end of this fiber optic, depending on kind of the angle it hits this fiber optic cable, changes the ultimate, brightness of the image. You probably remember me talking about XRD a little while ago, and you're wondering why I brought that up. Well, XRD is the way that we can see what is going on with this gold foil. And so Joka was one of the first to use XRD to find the properties of the gold foil and how it interacted with different electrical lights. And her team was the first to write several papers on the subject, going in more in depth on kind of what was going on here. And the information that they had let out developed the first standards for fiber optics. And these standards make sure that when you plug something in to your stereo, or if you're plugging in part of the backbone of the internet, it works the same way every single time. Just kind of like with the backbone of the internet, the people that make our world what it is are often forgotten or just ignored. Just as Joka had to work past prejudice as a woman in STEM to lay down groundbreaking research, not much is known about her today. In fact, the only non-academic article I could find about her was about her son, with only a glancing mention. And that did not really mention any of her achievements. And so it's important that we remember these women in STEM for the enormous potential and impact that they've had on our modern world, and that whenever we try to plug a fiber optic cable in, it works exactly the way we want it to, thanks to Dr. Vandenberg. These standards are still being used today. Joka's research literally laid the groundwork for the backbone of the internet and the intense integrated world wide web that connects us all today. Here you can see the wires and also the contact points as they enter their different destinations. Just like the cords in your home, these standards make sure that these backbones work the same way every time, no matter where they're established in the world. Fiber optics are the invisible heroes of our modern digital world. Without them, I doubt you could watch this video online, and during the pandemic, it has made it possible for me to continue my education uninterrupted and graduate on time. However, as you have noted, the things that are so important to our modern lives are often hidden out of sight. In the same way, very few people know the technology and the effect that it has on us, and even fewer know the people that has made it possible, like the people at the UK's IT department, thank you very much, Shelby, and the people like Dr. Joka Vandenberg, who have set the standards for what we now use. I hope that I've inspired you to look a little deeper at the small stuff, and really you never know what you're going to find.